Here's a tutorial for application 4.2.2. Now I deviate somewhat from the printed tutorial description, which you'll find in the course resources. But between the two, between this demo and the printed tutorial, I think you'll get a good idea of how to make a GIF animation. In Photoshop, what I've done is I've created a new file, and I've made it 800 by 600 pixels at 72 pixels per inch. That's screen resolution. You'll want to label it something intelligible that you can find in your files later. So I'm just going to simply call this GIF animation. Now, in previous steps, I've already set the type. What you would do is you would use your horizontal type tool, just like you did in exercise 4.2.1, and set your quote. I figured that this would be a nice arrangement. Now remember that whenever you use the type tool, it creates a new layer. Now some of this I may want on separate layers, and I'll show you why in a moment here. Now I've also prepared some images that I'm going to use on my animation. These happen to be 19th century engravings. Now I've used old engravings because they're in the public domain and I can get away with using them fairly safely. It's not required that you use imagery in your animations. I'm just using this as an explanation because it doesn't matter whether it's type or images. The connection between animating it and layers, I think, should become clear. Now notice I've got everything on its own layer. I've got the skull, the pen, the feather rather, and the paintbrush on its own layers. Once you've got it, and you'll want type on its own layers too, however you're going to divide it. Then you click Create Frame Animation. Make sure it's Create Frame Animation and not Create Video Timeline. And once you do that, you'll launch this dialog box at the bottom. Now I've jumped ahead a little bit here, but here's the timeline dialog box. Here's your scrub controls, and notice that I've got everything on its own layer. I've done some preliminary planning. I wanted to begin with Piracy Begins and just have the brush. So in the first frame, I've turned off the visibility of everything except for Piracy Begins and the brush. And visibility of a layer will indicate what's in that particular frame. So I've selected frame 1. All I want to show is Piracy Begins and a brush. So you can see that the visibility of the brush is turned on too. This icon of the eye means that that layer is visible. If the layer is blued out, pale blue, that means it's active. So I've turned on the visibility of the brush, the background, which is white, and the first part of the quote, which is Piracy Begins. Now I've jumped ahead to frame 6. I've inserted transitions, which I'll talk to you about in a few seconds here. By frame 6, I want to have where creativity ends, and I want to show the quill pen. So you'll see that in frame 6, I had the visibility of where creativity ends, the visibility of the brush and the feather, and the visibility of the background on. I want my animation to end with everything visible. The skull and crossbones replaced with the skull and brush and quill pen, plus the credit to Dr. Kankanala and the end of the quote. So you'll notice that for frame 11, which is the last frame, I've got those things turned on. I have everything turned on. Where creativity ends, credit to the author, the skull, the feather, the brush, and the background are all visible. Now what I've done in between frames is include transitions, and that's fairly easy to do. If you select a frame, let's say I wanted a longer transition between frame 10 and 11, then I can go here and insert as many frames as I want. Now I've got several things going on here. The position of everything will gradually fade in, and the opacity, that is, it'll go from transparent to opaque. All those things will add. Now watch what happens when I add frames. It becomes a longer animation, but it'll have transitions. You don't have to use transitions in your animation. I'm just using them here to give you an idea of a smoother effect for a longer animation. Now, the other thing you have control over is the duration of each frame. So I have these fairly quickly, and watch, when I rewind, you'll see that it appears, it's a little jerky, but it's a much smoother movement. And I have the last frame appearing for 5 seconds. That is just so that the viewer can read it. That's it for this demo. I think you can see the relationship between layers and turning on and off visibility per frame and the connection with the frames themselves. Good luck.